People are less inclined to disrespect you if they anticipate negative outcomes. People typically avoid disrespect not due to goodwill, but out of concern for potential repercussions. This statement may seem severe when considered alongside conventional leadership advice. We often assume respect comes from personal appeal, self-assurance, and genuineness. I previously held this view. However, I started observing interactions where status was actively negotiated. Respect isn't awarded based on ethical considerations. Instead, it's assessed by the likely consequences of disrespecting someone. This plays out even in minor situations. Consider a meeting with 10 participants. Some individuals are constantly interrupted, while others aren't. The determining factor is often not intelligence or preparation. Sometimes, the interrupted individual might even be more knowledgeable. Yet when someone cuts them off, the interruption goes unchallenged. They simply smile, adjust, and wait for their turn as the meeting progresses. In contrast, attempting a similar interruption with another person elicits a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The interruption is met with a composed, almost detached pause. Direct eye contact is made, and a carefully worded response follows. "Please allow me to finish." The tone remains calm, without any visible anger. However, what is communicated is understood as a reprimand. This usually happens once and rarely occurs a second time. I was surprised by how fast groups internalize this dynamic. Status psychology has examined this phenomenon extensively. In 1977, Albert Mehrabian discussed signals of dominance in communication. Studies on turn-taking in conversations have since revealed a strong relationship between interruption patterns and perceived hierarchy. Still, the usual explanation often concludes with the term confidence signals, which is easily acceptable. What this explanation often overlooks is that every group establishes an unspoken understanding of what can be taken from whom. Sociologists, such as Irving Goffman, have described social interaction as a performance where individuals attempt to preserve their face or public image. However, not all faces are equally protected. Some individuals are more sensitive to public image. Damaging an unprotected face has no repercussions. In the business world, this is easily seen. A 2014 study in the Academy of Management journal noted that employees who didn't address minor acts of disrespect later experienced more pronounced violations. Those who addressed such acts early on experienced fewer repeat offenses. This wasn't due to some moral awakening, but rather a response to expected outcomes. This principle leads to the unavoidable idea of social pricing. Every person in a group, often unconsciously, calculates. What happens if I dismiss this individual? What are the possible consequences if I interrupt them? If I disregard their boundaries, what will be the result? This assessment occurs quickly. Imagine a junior colleague rolling their eyes at another colleague's suggestion. If there's no reaction, the behavior may happen again the following week. Ultimately, the junior colleague might openly talk over the other person without hostility, simply as a matter of convenience. The group silently accepts the hierarchy. Now, consider a different reaction. The initial eye roll is met with a direct question. Is there something about my comment that's unclear? This isn't an emotional response or an act of hostility. The situation is simply brought to everyone's attention. As a result, the junior colleague adjusts their behavior. The potential cost of rudeness is increased. Here's where conventional thinking falls short. Standard psychology tells us that respect is gained through warmth and skill. Susan Fisk's two-dimensional model of warmth and skill explains how we classify people. However, it doesn't clarify why skilled, kind people are often marginalized. The element is deterrence. I recognized this in social circles long before reading Machiavelli. There's often one person who everyone teases. They're easy targets for jokes. The person often laughs along, which encourages more teasing, while no one deliberately decides to lower this person's status. Doing so becomes an accepted practice. There's also someone who is just as friendly and funny, but responds immediately when a boundary is crossed. The reaction isn't overblown, but it's clear. The teasing adjusts accordingly. It might not disappear completely, but it doesn't increase. This dynamic is not often discussed because it sounds manipulative. However, it's happening beneath the surface of polite interactions. Behavioral psychology offers a straightforward explanation. In 1953, B.F. Skinner introduced operant conditioning. According to this theory, behavior followed by positive reinforcement increases. Behavior followed by a negative consequence decreases. In social situations, reinforcement isn't always praise. It could be the absence of resistance. If you interrupt someone and the meeting continues smoothly, your mind sees it as an act of efficiency. There's no conflict and low cost. You're more likely to do it again. Yet, if interrupting results in a subtle social penalty, such as a pause, a response, or a reduced level of collaboration later, the mind reconsiders. Loss aversion, which Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky explained in the late 1970s, adds another layer. People are more afraid of losing something than they appreciate obtaining something of equal value. The possibility of losing status, access, or comfort, however small, discourages disrespectful behavior. The truth is, it costs little to disrespect some individuals. That statement sounds harsh, and I initially hesitated to acknowledge it. However, I've consistently observed the same pattern in workplace assessments, relationship issues, and social groups. Those who complain most about being ignored often allow minor disrespectful actions without any response. They hope their value to the group speaks for itself. Sometimes it does. In highly organized systems with established structures and clear rules, deterrence is less important. However, in more relaxed environments, social rank is negotiated every day. A negotiation without clear outcomes favors those who are confident, not necessarily those who are fair. There's also a sense of ease in being harmless. When others aren't afraid to offend you, you are viewed as safe. This safety can feel like acceptance. I've felt this way myself. Speaking out creates tension. Avoiding it creates peace, at least in the short term. However, peace without boundaries becomes permission. Pay attention to how employees describe different managers. One might be called nice, but not in control. The other is described as strict but fair. The first manager experiences opposition, missed deadlines, and quiet resistance. The second faces fewer challenges, even when making unpopular choices. Authority isn't protected by being liked, but rather by the expectation of outcomes. This brings us to the uncomfortable yet enlightening viewpoint found in Machiavelli's writings. In The Prince, Machiavelli noted that people offend due to either fear or contempt. He cautioned leaders against becoming objects of contempt. Contempt develops when authority appears weak. He wasn't suggesting cruelty as a source of enjoyment, but rather careful control. I was surprised at how often contempt starts with small actions, a delayed response, a slight smile when you're talking, or someone looking at their device while you're speaking. Each action is a test, silently asking, what is the price for diminishing you? If the answer is nothing, then you have no social capital. And here's the unsettling notion that most self-improvement advice avoids. The problem isn't that people disrespect you. The problem is that there are no negative results for them when they do. If the problem is that it costs them nothing, then we have to face an uncomfortable question: what actually guides people, moral standards or consequences? We prefer the moral answer. It makes us feel refined. It allows us to believe that if we are just, others will be just in return. However, when I started comparing moral statements with actual behavior, the picture shifted in a way that I didn't expect. People are more motivated by the prospect of a loss than by the hope of a gain. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed this in the late 1970s with their prospect theory. In controlled studies, people were given decisions presented either as potential gains or potential losses. Objectively, the outcomes were the same. However, framing the choice as a potential loss led to radically different choices. Losses had a stronger impact than equivalent gains. The fear of losing $100 was stronger than the happiness of gaining $100. Consider this in social situations. The possibility of reduced status, limited access, a lack of approval, or discomfort affects actions more consistently than the promise of being seen as good. This is where the common advice about empathy and shared principles begins to weaken. Empathy and principles do matter, but when results are introduced, behavior changes quickly. Skinner introduced operant conditioning in the 1950s. The principle was straightforward. Behavior followed by positive reinforcement increases. Behavior followed by negative reinforcement decreases. What is not often spoken is how exactly this relates to disrespect. In business settings, I've seen leaders who publicly promote a culture of openness and acceptance, but secretly allow small acts of undermining. They allow side conversations during presentations, passive resistance to deadlines, and sarcasm in emails. Since nothing is done, these actions are repeated. Over time, authority weakens, not through open defiance, but through repeated actions. Here, theory doesn't fail. It becomes bluntly simple. Behavior that goes unpunished is repeated. A more difficult aspect is inconsistency. In the 1960s, studies on variable reinforcement schedules, initially with animals and later with human gambling behavior, showed that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral patterns than consistent ones. Casinos thrive on this. A slot machine doesn't pay out every time. It pays out unexpectedly, which keeps players interested. In social dominance situations, random results function similarly. If a person sometimes responds to disrespect and sometimes ignores it, the group will begin testing boundaries more forcefully. The uncertainty invites experimentation. I've seen teams where a leader becomes angry over small offenses one week and ignores bigger offenses the next. The result isn't respect. It's strategic testing. Employees describe this experience as stressful, but they also admit something else. They push to see where the actual boundary is. Consider game theory. In 1984, political scientist Robert Axelrod held computer simulations based on the iterated prisoner's dilemma. Strategies competed over multiple interactions. The simplest and most successful strategy was tit for tat. It started by working together and then mirrored the opponent's previous action. Cooperation was rewarded with cooperation. Defiance was met with immediate resistance, but also forgiveness if cooperation was restored. Tit for tat was successful because of its predictability. People don't test saints. They test those who hesitate. A saint is always forgiving. There's no cost for defiance. A violent person responds unpredictably. The cost is stressful and sometimes unfair. Both situations create instability. The first invites exploitation. The second invites others to turn against the violent individual. The person who responds proportionally and consistently makes it strategically difficult to challenge. In businesses, this shows up in subtle ways. An employee sends work late. The manager says nothing the first time, offers a reminder the second time, voices mild disappointment the third time, and then suddenly issues a formal warning on the fourth. The employee doesn't see this as a lesson in moral behavior. He sees it as random. So he tests again. Now compare that to a manager who calmly says when the employee is late the first time, if this happens again, the project will be reassigned, and then follows through. There is no anger or shaming. There is simply action. Afterward, deadlines are no longer missed. This doesn't happen because everyone suddenly has a stronger work ethic. It's because the cost is seen. Research on social rank, like the work of psychologist Cameron Anderson in the early 2000s, suggests that status is maintained not just through competence, but also through the ability to control needed resources and set prices. People seen as unable or unwilling to set prices usually drop in rank over time, even if they are well-liked. This is where ethics become mechanics. We tell ourselves someone is disrespectful, but they are responding to incentives. This dynamic is not often discussed because it seems manipulative or even cynical. However, people feel it. The employee who realizes that complaining about unjust treatment changes nothing begins to withdraw. The partner who understands that broken promises have no result repeats them. The friend who learns that there are no consequences for teasing does it more. I remember a situation at a technology startup around 2016. A co-founder wanted to be seen as equal. He preferred to avoid conflict. Engineers openly challenged his choices in meetings. At first, it seemed like healthy debate. Over time, it turned into constant contradiction. Eventually, investors started going around him, speaking directly to the more forceful co-founder. The market didn't consider his intentions. It considered his outcomes. Here's where things get more complex. An emotional response is not the same as a predictable response. An emotional reaction is loud, often self-centered, and sometimes excessive. It helps the person reacting, but does little to clarify the boundaries. A predictable response is more quiet. It makes it clear that certain actions will lead to specific final outcomes. When responses are emotional, people adjust to your mood. When they are predictable, people adjust to the structure. I was surprised by how quickly this difference is seen by others. Teams can sense whether final outcomes are tied to beliefs or mood. Partners know whether boundaries are always there, or just sometimes. The body reacts differently. With emotional instability, there's stress. With predictable expectations, there is calculating. And calculating is the language of influence. The deeper difficulty lies here. Many of us want to be guided by morals, and we want others to be guided by them too. But when the environment says that values are something you can choose, but prices are real, behavior lines up with price. This doesn't mean morals are an illusion. It means morality without any action becomes a suggestion. So the question shifts from are people good to something less forgiving. What does this behavior cost? If disrespect causes a problem, it declines. If it causes nothing, it spreads. If behavior lines up with the price, then kindness alone is not enough. Be kind and people will respect you. That statement has been said in leadership talks, business strategies, and classrooms for years. It sounds morally correct. It also falls apart when observed closely. In 2002, psychologist Susan Fiske and others introduced the stereotype content model. We judge people mostly on warmth and skill. Warmth answers if you're a friend or enemy. Skill answers are you capable? The socially acceptable final thought was obvious. Express warmth and skill, and respect will follow. But something subtle happens in actual social structures. Showing warmth without the ability to enforce prices lowers your perceived threat level. And lowered threat often means lowered caution. I didn't fully understand this until I started monitoring leadership changes inside businesses. One situation always comes to mind. Around 2018, A large retail company hired a new regional director known for his empathy and cooperative style. Internal surveys referred to him as approachable and helpful. Within 6 months, deadlines weren't met. Senior managers openly questioned him in meetings between departments, and informal groups began forming without him. Nothing directly hostile, just a steady problem. In contrast, the previous director had been called demanding. Not cruel, but firm. When people didn't do what they were supposed to do, there were clear and immediate responses. Fewer people liked him, but more people followed his lead. Here, the theory falters. If warmth and skill are both present, why does one leader invite opposition while the other doesn't? The variable is signaling strength. Cameron Anderson's research at the University of California, Berkeley, in the early 2000s showed that those who combine generosity with assertiveness have higher long-term status than those who show generosity alone. Generosity without setting limits was seen as weakness in competitive situations. This is the rule of social structures that's rarely spoken. Warmth that doesn't include the chance of pushback is seen as open for discussion. I've seen this happen in small groups with almost mathematical accuracy. There's always someone who laughs first, forgives quickly, adjusts to schedules, and pays the bill when others forget. At first, the group thanks the person. Over time, requests become what is expected. Then they become an obligation. When the person finally says no, the reaction is surprise, even anger. You've changed. No, the person hasn't changed. The price has. This is what I call boundary elasticity. When someone sees that your limits can be moved, they push further. Not always on purpose. Sometimes they're testing. The first time you stay late to help, it's appreciated. The third time, it's what is expected. The fifth time, you need to explain why you can't. In 2011, a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology looked at how agreeable people do in competitive talks. People who were highly agreeable are liked more, but had fewer positive final outcomes. They gave in earlier. They tolerated imbalances for longer periods. Their warmth signaled flexibility. People speaking with them adjusted their plans as a result. This is stressful because it reframes being nice as something that gives people information. Controlled warmth is powerful. Warmth used to get others to like you is cheap. Controlled warmth is when a leader listens carefully, recognizes input, but makes the decision. A partner shows love, but also states what's not up for discussion. A colleague is friendly, but corrects interruptions right away. Warmth used to get others to like you feels different. It's slightly stressful. It waits for people to approve. It uses softer language. It allows small acts of disrespect to keep the peace. I've felt this difficulty myself. There's a brief moment where correcting someone risks being seen as difficult, so I'll let it go. That decision is noticed. In 1995, Deborah Gruenfeld's research on influence and behavior showed that people with low influence were more careful and flexible, while those with higher perceived influence acted more openly and interrupted more often. When warmth is not connected to signals of strength, observers place you closer to the lower influence role, and those in lower influence roles are tested. Disrespect rarely starts as open rebellion. It starts as a test. A delayed response, a joke about you in a meeting, a subtle change to your decision said to be just a suggestion. Each test gathers data. Will there be conflict, or will the situation go smoothly? In startup culture, where social structure is uncertain, this happens more quickly. Founders who call themselves just one of the team often have increasing difficulties with authority unless they make decision rights clear. I've seen product managers openly ignore instructions because the founder wanted agreement over action. Agreement felt democratic, but it weakened command. The socially acceptable explanation would be communication style. The less acceptable explanation is a lack of deterrence. This does not mean cruelty gets respect. Cruelty creates anger and rebellion. Machiavelli suggested avoiding hatred, but he also suggested avoiding being looked down on. In his language, being looked down on meant being seen as weak, inconsistent, or unable to defend your place. Kindness without any clear responses moves toward that area. What people feel in these places is uncertainty. They admire the kind leader, but quietly align with the decisive one. They tell themselves they value working together, but they schedule projects around whoever has the last word. The body trusts structure more than emotions. Here, the lie falls apart quietly but clearly. Kindness does not guarantee respect. In uncertain social structures, it can invite strategic disrespect. Because when warmth lowers how much of a threat you seem to be and there's no result for breaking the rules, the system adjusts. Boundaries stretch. What is expected grows. Tests get stronger. Being nice is not dangerous. And what is not dangerous is rarely respected. If what is not dangerous is rarely respected, then we have to ask, how do you make yourself more dangerous without becoming the bad guy? Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This is quoted forever, usually as proof of cynicism. What is less quoted is his warning that a leader must avoid being hated. Hatred causes instability. Fear makes it stronger. That difference is the key. Fear is not violence. It's expecting actions for broken agreements. We would call it expectation management, but that's too gentle. What Machiavelli understood in 16th century Florence, and what political science keeps learning, is that influence rests on trust. Not charm, not values. Trust. Consider the early years of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. In the 1960s and 70s, he made strict anti-corruption rules and strong results for those who work for the government. People in other countries called the actions controlling. But the message was clear: corruption would be punished quickly and openly. Over time, corruption rates decreased a lot. The citizens didn't love every law, but government workers feared the certainty of the results. The key word is certainty. Uncontrolled cruelty creates hatred. History has many examples. Joseph Stalin ruled through stress, worry, and unfair violence. Purges were unpredictable. Being loyal offered no help. The result was obedience mixed with hidden conflicts. When violence is uncertain, it creates secret alliances. Calm, precise actions work differently. I saw a business version of this happen at a European company around 2012. A new chief executive was given a culture of quiet resistance. Deadlines didn't matter. Internal politics flourished. Instead of firing people dramatically, he made one decision that was well seen. A senior worker who had often worked against cooperative efforts was removed quietly but decisively after an action that was well documented. There was no public shaming. There was no emotional speech. Just an announcement connected to the facts of what took place. The culture changed within weeks. Employees later called the feeling not as fear of the man, but fear of going against clear instructions. He doesn't yell, one manager said. He just acts. That is creating a system of trust. Reputation isn't simply about being loud or present everywhere. Instead, it emerges from the consistent patterns people observe. It hinges on establishing a clear expectation. If a boundary is crossed, there will be a definite outcome. This isn't a maybe or something dependent on someone's mood, but a consistent and predictable response. Research in behavioral science offers some support for this idea, though indirectly. Studies exploring deterrence in criminology, particularly those of Gary Becker in the late 1960s, indicated that the certainty of a consequence acts as a stronger deterrent than its severity. A harsh penalty that's unlikely to be applied has less impact on behavior than a moderate consequence that is consistently enforced. If we think about this in terms of everyday interactions, a leader who sometimes reacts strongly but ignores violations most of the time generates anxiety without any sense of order. On the other hand, a leader who responds in proportion to each violation creates a sense of clear calculation. There's a major emotional difference for the people who are led. Under a system of random reactions, people tend to whisper, form alliances, and find protection. Under a way of doing things that is predictable, people change how they act. Sometimes the field of psychology seems to show some uncertainty here. There is encouragement to inspire, to empower, and to create safe spaces. These intentions are good. However, safety without a stable structure can lead to testing, and testing without responses weakens authority. It wasn't obvious how often dislike is prompted not by the result itself, but by the understanding of unfairness in giving that result. Research done on organizational justice by Gerald Greenberg during the 1980s showed that people take bad things better if ways of doing things seem fair and done the same way constantly. It isn't the result that makes people dislike the person. It is caring about some, but not about the others, and not knowing what to expect. Machiavelli seemed to know this without being taught it. He guided rulers to do bad things quickly and not to do them over and over. Keep bad things to a minimum. Make doing it to them have meaning to it. Then stop. If bad things take too long and cannot be expected, dislike will come from them. One action done on purpose makes people think before doing it. In governments, this appears in how they respond to early shows of not listening. When small wrongdoings go unnoticed, opposition becomes brave. When early boundaries are done in the same way, growing out of control becomes slow. This isn't something that makes disagreeing disappear, but it changes people thinking of the dangers. In business teams, the same idea works on a small level. A manager who lets sarcastic comments be said in meetings without any response will soon face someone openly making fun of them. If the first sarcastic comment is spoken about calmly, that is not the way we say things as a team. The way of saying things goes back to normal. The team may not love being told what to do, but they see what the boundary is. Considering this, being afraid isn't all about people trembling under someone. It has to do with knowing results. It is about knowing that what they do has a result that can be predicted. It may sound backwards, but when fear is framed, making a show of force becomes something less needed. What is thought about the situation does most of the work. People control what they do to keep from paying the cost. Another thing has been noticed. Leaders who are afraid of being disliked often act too warm after doing something to keep a boundary. They make the signal more weak. They say they are sorry too much. The group does see that they are unsure. The cost can be talked about again. The authority isn't in the result itself. It lies in knowing a reaction will happen for sure. If knowing that reaction will happen is done, most problems will never take place. If it is missing, even those who care about others will be tested many times. Here is the part that isn't clear. If fear must be a part of holding respect, then how much fear is okay before it turns bad? At what point does thinking before doing become leading by force? Machiavelli gave a way to understand it, not something to stand behind for moral reasons. He said not to cause dislike, but he did say to cause fear. The line between the two is more narrow than most want to say. If one cannot know what will happen, they will be challenged. When one knows what will happen, this creates order. If what will happen creates order, then everything focuses on one time that is weak when something goes wrong the first time. Not the 10th, not some big dispute, but the first time. The first time not showing respect tells a lot. It isn't usually something that explodes. It is small, something that can be debated. Someone you work with stops you while you are talking and keeps speaking as if they should be the one talking. Someone you work with makes a cutting joke about you to others and watches how you're going to respond. A member of the team puts what you decided as just one option from options. A study during 2009 that can be found in Administrative Science quarterly looked at status conflicts among newly created teams. Observers saw that early times of talking, mostly who stopped other people and who gave way, could be used to tell what the group would act like later. What the pattern was settled, it did support itself. First times going away from the pattern showed more of an impact. There is a memory of watching a meeting about what the technology company would do to reach its goals during 2017. One of the newly made directors was going to say what they would do to reach those goals. After 5 minutes, a senior engineer stopped the director by saying, "That was done before. It is not going to work." Everybody in the space was silent. The director gave a smile, agreed, and said, "That is a good idea to be brought up. We will discuss it." The presentation wasn't the same after that. As the months continued, that engineer put himself as an equal person of authority. Nothing aggressive took place. No jilling, just something that happened. If that first wrongdoing is noticed, it becomes information. The group sees that stopping someone has no cost. Their brain gets upgraded with this information. The stock goes down. Being tested in order to be the boss rarely is known. However, it is done on purpose. Research performed on primates by Franz de Waal during the 1980s pointed out that early signals of handing over the situation shown by groups of chimpanzees had an impact on their long-term rank. Once they acted with handing over the situation, the other people acted up more and said things aggressively. Humans are more difficult, but the base talking about working up to who is the boss follows the same patterns. The wrongdoing going up from there is almost mechanic. First, testing a little. If it accepted, a small test. If it is still accepted, talking as if it is normal. Going as far as not caring. Each step feels small on its own. When all put together, they rebuild who is in control. Here is where the idea of just do not notice it cannot be followed. There used to be a thought in being mature in not responding to everything that is a bit wrong to someone. There is truth in that, but it has a blind spot. Not noticing the first wrong doing tells someone that you are one that will break. It does not tell them that you are strong. It is here where answering with costs comes into the situation strongly. Not being angry, not in some dramatic showing. Correcting right away. During a meeting, it should be as easy as, "I wasn't done talking." Speak calmly. Hold contact with the eyes. Keep speaking. No sarcastic tone. Not doing anything too much. The cost is put on the one that stopped them. If something is told to the wrong person with humor publicly, they answer, "Please say what you mean," said in a flat tone. Humor put into sight loses its protection. The one making the joke must either take back what they said or be open about rising the situation. Using being the boss of a company, it will be much more quiet. Cutting away access. Less invitations. Information is no longer being shared openly. The saying of a senior person who is in charge at a place of consulting during 2014, they have never faced someone under them by getting emotional. If someone went against them during a meeting with a client, that person would not be allowed to work on the project that gets put on display next. No talking needed. No warnings. Just the cost. That person learned. Research performed and having to do with how action is done points out that being told right away shapes how people act better than being told after some time has been spent. And how children learn. Studies during the 1970s and following pointed out that children will adjust how they act more often when the teachers answered right away and with what was correct. Not saying something later would make a more weak knowing between those two. The same goes for other people that are in meeting rooms. However, here is something to think about. Giving the right thing must be in balance, but also obvious. In balance, this is because going too hard makes others hate and get into groups. Obvious, This is because telling them by themselves will not put the leader back in place for the group. If not showing respect takes place in front of everyone and the answer is hiding, then they still see the first action as being something done right. Here's a problem. Not only are you putting what is right to the one that did wrong, but you're also sending a signal to the eyes watching. There have been leaders who say they are sad after something happens publicly. They schedule a time to talk one-on-one, point out sadness, and talk about how to act later. While this is being done, the team remembers the meeting where someone went against the leader and there was no pushing back. The line of who is boss in the office quietly turns. Looking from a different way, a leader who tells someone calmly that they should not have the space in telling will send a signal that does not need to be seen over and over. The feeling from the people in these moments is filled with pressing down. When someone's limit is added right away, the space becomes more tight. There's a bit of not feeling good. Then there is something that settles down. A stable design comes back. When one's limit is ignored, the space relaxes for a time, but there's a feel in not being very sure. Who is truly in charge? What is being said is talked about because it feels done on purpose, even controlling. However, everybody who talks to others knows this without being taught. The first allowance tells others what to expect. In research having to do with talking to others, including what Adam Galinsky had done during the early 2000s, the first grip and early giving others will impact the final result heavily. Let go of too much at the start, and the option shifts more in their favor. Looking at social life, the first time not showing respect turns into what will be accepted. There is also something stopping the one that is being tested from the inside. The first telling feels like the hardest. Later, what is done becomes something that has to do with who they are. If that person knows that they are one that will have limits set, action comes after them naturally. If that person knows that they are one to stay away from going against others, holding back gets more high. Here is where many lose the game before they see that one has started. The first wrong doing sets what your value is. If the first wrong doing sets your value, then another question rises, and it is harder to dodge. If you're on purpose creating costs, if the danger is being felt, are you taking control of others? Here is how. There's no clear idea that most talking about authority stays clear of. There's a bit of a difference between holding the line and pushing others for your own reasons. But from looking without being in the situation, they may look the same. Both have been brought about because of what was done. Both have control. The difference is in what tells them to do it and how much they do it. And that difference cannot be seen unless you have seen yourself in all honesty. Dr. Keltner's research done on how authority may not be how one thinks, mostly what he did during 2013 when working at Berkeley, showed that people who worked up to be the person by being empathic and having social thinking would often lose that after getting authority. More authority would be paired with less understanding of how others are feeling and more doing things without thinking. It wasn't obvious how right on this pattern across businesses and governments was. The very skills that pushed people would be getting worse under more control. Here is where something that made you think before doing wrong turns into being intoxicated. You have started by fixing a wrong doing over a limit set. It will work in the space. The pressing down will be felt subtly. It is making you act. Seeing that it will work pays a very high price. The part of the brain, wired to build, notices. The time to be scared isn't in the first fixing. It is in the happiness of having the effect. During the early 1970s, Philip Zimbardo's fake prison showed how fast people who were given roles of authority inside of them, even something that was not right and was criticized some time later, the result means something for thinking. Those who were given the power made their actions more intense than what was needed for the role. They call being mean as bringing what is right. What is done being thought of as working patterns can be called. I am having the standard level. They are in needing of being told with authority. This is for the good of everyone. Each of these words can be true. Each statement can still hide one's wants. There have been managers who shift from measured limit holding to planned, not showing respect under the label of teaching a lesson. The first time they told someone working under them by being with the group, it was in comparison. The fifth time, the telling had in it a slight pushing of buttons. By the 10th, they would add a show. The space changed. What someone was told to do was there, but there was something else that was there as well, not showing respect in a quiet way. Here, Machiavelli becomes one to think about than what his name says. He said that being bad, if needed, must be put to good use, put right at once, kept small, and not show itself as something that is needed. Being bad, done across some time, prompts dislike. Bad, given not in a good pattern, prompts not being respected. He knew that how one's behavior can go up out of control before neuroscience gave it a name. Research that took place during 2011 in social neuroscience started to point out that authority makes reward parts of the brain start, close to those started by getting money. Being told they should have one with control would be seen with high dopamine results. Having an effect is becoming more strong by itself. Seldom does one say this out loud within reading and writing created to help with being the leader. Here is where holding the line can turn into pushing for one's own wants without saying a word. Holding the line asks, how small is the cost to keep from doing what is wrong? Pushing for one's own wants asks, how far can push things out before they act up? One is putting together order. The other is putting people against them. Social psychology of authority, including Stanley Milgram's experiments in the 1960s, showed how those who saw a person in a place of authority would fall in line with ease. Those that were taking part gave what they thought were painful electric shocks if someone in authority told them to. What they found was scary, not simply falling in line. It went with how they felt what they were doing at some time later. What they were responsible for had been shifted up the scale. I was just going with what I was being told. In real lines of authority, others under that person will fall in line by showing it, but not feeling it. They would say, "It is not up to me." This is what often happens. On the top, it seems stable. Underneath, trust goes away. The problem becomes harder when thinking about businesses and politics. A person in charge is adding very strong standards for how things must be done. What is coming out of this is going up. There is fear, but there is also output. Is this being controlled, or is it doing things with rules? The answer relies on being able to compare and being open. When results are paired honestly to how they have been acting and given evenly, seeing them as doing things the right way will stand. When results are paired with feeling, showing caring for some but not others, and not being sure of oneself, seeing them as doing things the right way break down. Inside one person, a small signal may be noticed that puts the two from one to the next. With holding the line, giving back the right seems almost uneventful. It is done by rule. Someone cannot know that the other is getting emotional. With pushing for one's own wants, giving back contains heat. The pleasure is in knowing that the other person is not at ease. That heat is the signal being aware. Being filled with authority closes sight. One starts to say disagreeing as not listening, talking about what is not working as not showing respect, being the one in change as a danger. The system gets tightened. Fear goes up. So this week, past events showcase this. People in charge who added authority, would often fall not simply because of being feared, but because of giving what was being told over long periods. People who were in office that did the same thing for having what was right more exactly started to grow what was in their control into things that were not a big deal at all. Controlling replaced what was to be done. Looking replaced trust. A quiet group came to be made against them. Here is something that is not clear to most. One has authority simply by showing what they have. The more they tell others, they are not sure of themselves. What Machiavelli said with more meaning wasn't about saying it was okay to be a bad person. It was about being a warning about what amount to give. Give only what is needed. Hold it. Then going back to things being balanced. The line between limits and control are not made clear by what one has in mind on its own. It is made clear from keeping quiet. If what comes back because of the activity becomes emotion, lose that person doing things the right way. Once they're gone, fear does not hold the system. It makes it unstable. If emotional result fades what someone sees as doing things correctly, then answering in a moment, even in a smart way, it is not power as it's done at last. Something that needs to be done, but takes too long. The move that takes place happens when you stop reacting and start doing things on purpose. Power is not about reacting. It is about doing things in a space where doing certain things is not a good idea. This was not understood fully until watching two people in office doing something with not showing respect at the same time in different parts of the same company in 2015. One fixed every time by themselves personally. They were clear, even in control, but they were always a part of something. Every going up cost them being there. The other rebuilt the authority by telling who could talk to who could decide, and who could come to the strategic meetings. Within months, the amount of going against them went down, not because they faced more, but because less people wanted to or could go against them publicly. Here is a move from what action is done to a drawing. Research showing what has been done goes back to 1970, when Henry Mintzberg showed that what is put together has more meaning on how people act than how a person is. Putting decisions in one place more heavily puts authority to decide in one place and makes it less difficult to know who can tell others under them to do what it is they are wanting. Putting together the design increases how hard it is to follow who can tell people to do things because authority is being shared and it may not be open for one to see. If authority is not fully understood, showing no respect is hidden within something that is hard to follow. Design is pulling apart what is difficult to understand. Having control of access is the first part of the design. In every line of authority, access is what they are using. Who can have time with their leaders? Which people go to plan meetings? Who are the people that hear about information earliest? In politics, who have access has clearly showed it is a form of soft power. In companies, it does the same thing. Those who take away from authority but get to keep being in contact with others show the system that disagreeing means nothing. When access shrinks after going against rules, without it being planned, the signal spreads through loops. People hear the patterns. He has not been allowed to come after something that happened. No one must speak. It is hard to know who has control of information. Because of Ronald Burt's research in a spot inside a network, those who were in charge of information bridges, spots with holes, would add to the impact. One becomes a good way that information flows. Others rely on being in line with them to stay within the ring. Showing no respect that says to everyone that knowing how to act out gets kicked out of knowing something. Again, the cost comes to be something done, not personal. Keeping back rewards is another one to use. Not getting told in some dramatic show. Simply kicking out of the option being given. High showing plans. Giving praise to people in public. Taking time to guide. To say it like behavior being bad. Get rid of something that is being seen as good. It is less stirring than adding pain, however it is often done well. There have been teams that changed fast when they found out when the choice was made to give a reward or not. It was joined openly to things they did, not simply things given when they can be shown. One company in 2019 changed. Those seeing clients would get chances shown by things they can score, but also for helping and following rules. A senior consultant kicked himself out because he didn't like to be nice when with a group. Nothing was said needed, just pattern. Slowly his behavior shifted. Being the head, one, showing it may be the strongest to use. Robert Cialdini's research of what the heads show others during the 1980s made it clear that they would find out what others did right, mostly in what made them unsure. When some people of impact show it well, following rules, others tag along. Where people of impact go against them, not getting told, those behind them show it. How a system is drawn with plans for making friend from others. To show some people and line them next to what the rules have said. To make stronger what the limits are. Doing what seems right means everyone is doing it, not just one person alone. When design is being used, network adds effects that strengthens the show. One time, when someone learns a way of acting, not stopping when people are showing, going off from what they have learned is something that causes high costs even before what they have learned is a big deal. The system helps itself do what is right. From how someone working can feel from this shift is different. Spaces where people react are filled with stress and focus on what a person is. In a space filled with systems, pressing down is slowly added to what is a rule. The air from the area gets stable. A known set of rules will come out on its own when what is put together switches over feeling. Limits being known means standards are shown. They're trying to find out. Decisions will be right. Doing things told will be seen for all to know. Making the results known for sure mean answers must show what when others violate the rules. Nothing dramatic. For sure. Not adding emotions mean rules are done without doing it for the one. No mean things. No being sarcastic. Not seeing that it is happy making. When these three exist next to one another, being open about how they feel will go down with fighting. The system pulls in small testing before they get bigger. Here's something else to think of is, in well-drawn systems, people in charge will appear calmer, even wanting of care. Seldom will they must say their control often because what is being done carries out the signal. Their authority feels soft because it is in design. This isn't being nice overall. It is making influence greater. Machiavelli knew that what was set up to be will go on to last more than what a person feels. Someone who is in charge by showing force must stay paying close thought to what is taking place. A person who is in charge who shows laws and structures can make what comes about better. The people who are the strong will really do something to give back. What is made will do it for them. There is fear out there. What has been made and put together. They can get stuck. At what point what is to keep someone from doing what is wrong turn out to be what the silence to be is, where being new to things suffocates when everything has something being done back. That line is skinny. That line is skinny than it looks. There has been a place that was created to keep away bad comments has slowly became hard, where people do not agree with each other. Being the same causes a bit of a problem. While trying to defend being confused, one may keep a bit of what is needed. Being told what to do is not the same as being stable. Fear is easily something that can be used. The clear telling of what you have shown is being worked out. In 1998, Deborah Gruenfeld and Larissa Tidens showed how being mad can increase someone's position and give rates, but only when being filled with anger was being called what had to be said and being controlled. Being filled with not being controlled would lower trust. One should not have thought that this would have been what someone did depend on the area. The data was said loud, depending how the situation was set, and what that person being shown for that act went higher or lower. What has been said does cause discomfort. Emotions are not being power by themselves. It is what everyone says. Then, fearing should not be something that the movies make for someone of great power. It should be something on what is said about to come about. The expert in what people say about what is to come. Daniel Kahneman showed that people can lose more easily than being given the same. It is not being about the words they are wanting to be shown. It tests something. When stepping over the set can cause a loss of being access to get or have authority, how people act changed and what feels great to say is fast. Where there's being not knowing changes the play. To give what one does not, that did not say generates being worried. Not be shown as a person to listen to. In 2007, Tom Tyler showed that other members will be there. It should be to say, be fair and open. What should not be is that acting fair, but not going with it will make someone want to test that action. If doing what is shown about acting rebels, being has both of these, authority is not said out loud. It is made. It is said in who makes what decisions, how information runs, and where words go. Being 2012, Google's Project Oxygen has the people with good scores are not the most nice to be next to, but who does what has to be won, setting expectations and going through. The language feels soft, clear word showing design. What one with a clear word and supporting takes from a conflict. Middle leaders tried to copy this, but failed. They had the actions of stable, but don't show they had to do what has a price to be had. Clear things were shown, then bent for other who have good performance. The system crashes the system, and the other person felt it even could not talk or follow. When knowing something will is bargained, the one filled with fear gets to be not trusted. Modeling grows often that has machines in it. Doing things wrong not have a great cost. It can be spread in what looks to be right. This high cost of being emotional and not what is right, it has to be a secret. How it is right that things are easy to change. They could be afraid to make others feel, not for being bad, but stepping over a person is a smart. This is the incentive to do that one knows it's not for one when it does. Machiavelli, and to be kind, he must be kind. So that to the action, it must be to long. Repeat will lose will to stand the thing it wants.